Harold, thank you so much for joining us today. Real quick before we get into the questions, if you could briefly just explain in your own words a little bit more about yourself and what you do for the franchise industry.
Well, I am a franchise lawyer. I've been doing this now for over 40 years. I represent franchisors who franchise their business. I've in the past represented franchisees. I have been a franchisee on my own, and I have sat on the board of directors of major franchise companies over the years. And I continue to practice franchise law.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And yeah, every time I look up franchises, I see your name popping up everywhere. So definitely the right person for this subject. We're going to be asking you 5 of the biggest legal questions that people have when buying a franchise. And the first question is, why can't a franchisor modify the financial terms of an agreement, i.e. the loyalty fees, franchise fees, etc.?
Well, the answer is franchisors do not want to make changes to the fee structure of their business, because the reality is if they change the terms for one franchisee and others find out, they'll have to change it for everybody. Plus, on the initial fees, if you change or modify the initial fees, you have to disclose that going forward. And that would mean that everybody and his uncle would want to negotiate the fees and change the fees. So franchisors don't modify the financial terms of any of their agreements.
Okay, thank you very much. And how come a franchisor can't give me earning numbers on their stores?
Well, they can't verbally give you earnings numbers unless they provide those in the franchise disclosure document under what we call Item 19. If they put the numbers into Item 19, then yes, they can give you store numbers. But if they don't have what we call an earnings claim or an Item 19 financial disclosure, performance disclosure, they cannot do that legally. That would be illegal for them to do that.
Another question is how come the range of investments under Item 7 have such a large variance?
A couple of reasons. One, to protect the franchisor from possible lawsuits, because if there isn't a great range and a franchisee exceeds what's in Item 7, they could turn around and say to the franchisor, you told me it would be X, and how come it's 10 times X? So franchisors, in order to cover themselves, put in a pretty wide range in terms of what the investment. Plus, an investment in New York City may be substantially different than an investment in Tallahassee, Florida. So the franchisor wants to cover that by putting in a very substantial range.
Excellent, thank you. And how can I find out about how other franchisees are doing in their particular genre?
Okay, if you have the franchise disclosure document from the franchisor, then if you turn to the back, which is Item 20, there will be a list of franchisees, and they'll give you the name and address and phone number for those franchisees. And I tell anybody looking to buy a franchise, call as many franchisees as you can. And particularly if they're in your general geographic area, make sure you target those franchisees as opposed to somebody who's across the country. But that's how you find out, and that's how you do your due diligence, is by calling all these franchisees who are listed in Item 20.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And how do I know how many units the franchisor has opened, sold, or closed?
Again, that's the franchise disclosure document. Item 20 has a bunch of charts, and these charts talk about closures and terminations and openings over the last 3 years. So that's an important item to focus on when you get the disclosure document from the franchisor, because that's going to list for the last 3 fiscal years openings and closings.
All right, Harold. Yeah, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. And I have one more question for you. If you were looking to buy a franchise, what would you look for in a franchisor?
Well, first of all, the way to evaluate a franchisor is by having the franchise disclosure document in your hand. And when people want to buy a franchise, it's important to read item 1, talks about what the franchise is and what they do. Item 2 talks about who's running the company. Item 3 is very important because that tells you if there's any litigation against the franchisor. Item 5 is important. We discuss the fees and what they are. And the same with item 6, talks about the royalties. Item 7 is important because it's the investment that you're going to have to make. And then probably the next most important item would be 12, so you see if you get a protected territory or not. That's very important. And item 19, if there is one, is very important, which is the earnings claims. And lastly, item 20, which we talked about. Those are the ones.
Excellent. And Harold, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Such a great wealth of knowledge for our potential franchise investors. Really hope to have you back on the show. And thank you very much for taking your time with us and sharing your knowledge today.
Nathan, it's my pleasure, and I will be available anytime you need me.
Thank you.